Have you ever wondered what really happened to the people who opened King Tut's tomb? Was it just a coincidence that many of them died shortly after? Or was there something more sinister at play? In 1922, Howard Carter traveled with a team of scientists to ancient Egypt, hoping to find something revolutionary. After months of frustration, he sent his sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, a telegraph, informing him of his zero luck, or better still, ill luck. His reply was short and simple: one more season to find something tangible and you're out. The pressure was high, the tension was real. Thankfully, Howard struck gold. He made a shocking scientific discovery, but died shortly after. What did Howard find? Why did he die? Was it worth the struggle? In an unexpected twist, at least 13 people who witnessed the opening of King Tut's tomb died shortly after the great reveal. Don't you find that odd? Well, what was even more odd was the findings of the scientists. Everything about his tomb was very disturbingly unusual. They were surprised to find that things were quite different from what they expected. You see, ancient Egyptians held pharaohs in high regard, like gods, even in death. That's why they took such care in the mummification process and decorated tombs with utmost respect. So why was King Tut's tomb an exception? Let's travel back in time to 1324 BC. That's when it all started. At that time, Pharaoh Tutankhamun's reign had just ended. It's no news that the ancient Egyptians never joked about the burial of their kings. It was important for their kings to ascend. They believed that without this, the world would come to a total halt. The sun won't rise, crops will fail, livestock will die, and soon enough we too would cease to exist. It would be a catastrophe. So just like every other pharaoh before him, he was mummified. The only problem was King Tut's mummy looked nothing like the other royal mummies from the 18th and 19th centuries. The tomb was quite astonishing, according to archaeologists. Instead of a glorious and spacious room, King Tut was paid in a cramped hole. This raised many questions, but that was not all. The late king was also laid very far from his royal ancestors, and according to ancient Egyptian belief, this means that he wouldn't have been able to reunite with his family in the afterlife. Even if the ancestral tombs were out of space, what explanation would we give for why there wasn't even a single coffin for King Tut? Instead, he ended up in this trio of golden coffins that were probably hand-me-downs from someone else. Weird, huh? The one in the center seemed like it was originally made for Neferuaten, a forgotten ruler who never got her time to shine. What's even worse is the fact that when they were stuffing Tutankhamun into his makeshift coffin, they chopped off bits of his body just to make it fit. Definitely the rush job of the century. His entire burial really seemed like an afterthought. In fact, experts have said that King Tut's mummification was of very poor quality, and his death was even more shady. Imagine being a god to your people, and then 3,000 years later, some random guy on YouTube calls your neatly wrapped and packaged carcass low quality. Anyway, what made Tutankhamun's mummy stand out, you might ask? And how did his long-forgotten tomb suddenly become one of the most famous tombs in the world? Well, to put it simply, all wasn't right in the burial of King Tut, and a close examination of King Tut's gave us the first clue. So the first step in the Egyptian mummification process is to take out the internal organ of the deceased through a small cut on the left side of the body. The cuts eventually got large, but that was more than 650 years after King Tut's death. Remember how we said small cut? Well, our dear Pharaoh's cut was anything but small. The X-ray showed a large cut from his navel all the way down to his hip. Definitely not the norm. But how about his missing heart and rather rough mummification process? This leads us to the second surprise. The boy Pharaoh didn't have a heart. It's no news that the ancient Egyptians were big on keeping organs intact during mummification, right? But for some reason, Tutankhamun's heart was MIA. And if you're familiar with ancient Egyptian history, you know what that means. He didn't take his brain along to the afterlife. Imagine being brainless for eternity. The third oddity was the embalming process. When Tut's tomb was found, the scientists noted that his body had already started to deteriorate and was even almost unrecognizable. But why? Why was King Tut's death and burial roughly done, Why weren't the best embalmers hired to dress the late king to the afterlife? We aren't in 1324 BC at the moment, but we were able to gather a few possible reasons. One theory says that Tut probably died in a place where he could get immediate attention from the best hands. It is very unlikely that King Tut died in the palace or anywhere close to the Nile Valley. And where do you think that would have been? He either died while he was out hunting in the wild or at the battleground in the middle of some war or something. Sounds possible, but there's another very interesting hypothesis. He had a laundry list of health issues, from congenital clubfoot to a weak immune system. They even found signs of malaria in his mummy. But even with all that, he still managed to have some fun, riding around in chariots and whatnot. And some say that's how he ended up with a broken leg. Crazy stuff, right? Now, if we piece together all these clues, here's a wild theory. Tut, the boy, was riding on his chariot and, oops, he tumbled over and the chariot went right over his chest and squashed his heart. In a rush to preserve what's left of him, they quickly mummify him. Fast forward a few millennia, and adventurers find him in a cramped closet of a tomb. In an attempt to move him, they accidentally knocked out a piece of his skull. Oh, and turns out, Tut's mummy was on fire at some point. Yes, you heard that right. Cue to spooky music. And just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, bam! The Curse of the Pharaohs rumor starts making the rounds. Classic ancient Egypt, always keeping us on our toes, right? Anyway, some other people believe that the incompetent mummification could have also been because King Tut's burial was rushed. Someone might have desperately needed to get rid of the young pharaoh as soon as possible. And that is very possible because Tutankhamun actually died in the heat of a military and political crisis. At the time, ancient Egypt, which was a world empire at the time, just lost a war against the Hittites. People started murmuring. Things were starting to get more uncomfortable. Add that to the fact that Tutankhamun was very young at the time, so the loss only fueled the doubt in the hearts of his subject. People trusted his leadership less, and some wondered if he really had what it took to lead such a great nation. And unfortunately for young Tut, he didn't ever have an heir. This was the jumpstart for the high-stakes race to bury Tit quickly and seize his long-covered throne. Who were the people involved in the power struggle for the crown? First in line was Ankhesenamun, Tut's widow. Although her chances at winning this clash of titans were very slim, seeing as she was a woman and the wife of the late king who wasn't everyone's favorite person at the time. Yet this widow was very ambitious and went above and beyond to make her dreams come true. Unfortunately for her, her father, also had his eyes on the throne, and he stopped at nothing till she eventually got it. The third competitor was the commander-in-chief of the army, Horemheb. And boy, did he have the influence and titles to earn the crown. He was the deputy of deputies and the inspector of inspectors, basically the highest official under the pharaoh. Sadly, he had to wait till Amy's reign ended before he could finally become pharaoh. Enough talk about the pharaoh's death. Let's dive into the main meat of the matter. What really happened to the scientist who dared to open King Tut's tomb? This is the story of one of the most famous tombs in the world. In 1922, King Tut's lost tomb was found at the west bank of the Great Nile, and shortly after, this late pharaoh gained popularity and became an icon while the tomb raiders disappeared mysteriously. At the time, it was the only tomb from ancient Egypt that had stayed intact for more than 3,000 years. When archaeologist Howard Carter and his team opened it in 1922, the tomb was stacked full of artifacts and, more importantly, gold. It was a remarkable scientific find, but it marked a beginning and an end. 13 people mysteriously kicked the bucket after the tomb was opened. What killed these people? How did they die? Was it the curse? Because the spooky curse found in these tombs are actually spine-chilling. It says, "Cursed be he who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence," which sounds very much like, anyone who messes with a pharaoh's rest is doomed. They'll catch some mysterious disease that no doctor can fix. So word got out about the curse of the pharaohs, and it spread like wildfire worldwide, and many believe that was why those guys died. But what if the curses were just mere warnings meant to scare tomb raiders away? Think about it. If you were burying a person with tons of gold, you'd definitely do worse to shoo away greedy folks, right? Whatever the reason might have been, these deaths were still very spooky. For example, Howard Carter gifted his friend Sir Bruce Ingham a paperweight that was made from a mummified hand wearing a scarab bracelet. The bracelet had an ancient Egyptian warning written on it that said, "Cursed be he who moves my body, to him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." And before we knew it, Ingham's house went up in flames. He rebuilt the house, but again it got flooded. We don't know if he actually got sick, or maybe he even got rid of the creepy gift altogether. If you think that was just a mere coincidence, 1924 would make you think twice. The first X-rays on King Tut's body were conducted by Sir Archibald Douglas Reed. That year, he died from some mysterious illness. The next person on death's playlist was Evelyn White, an archaeologist from the Tut excavation team. He killed himself, and his suicide note said, "I have succumbed to a curse." Could be the Egyptian curse, and it could also be that he was super depressed after losing his dear friend. The deaths didn't stop there. Oh no, the party had just begun. In 1926, George Benedict from the Louvre Museum died after visiting the ongoing excavation at the tomb. Another Egyptologist, Aaron Ember, bit the dust that same year, and this time in a freak accident at home. After Howard Carter's big dig, way back when A.C. Mace took the reins and continued digging from 1924 to 1928. But the longer he stayed around the site, the weaker he became until he eventually collapsed in 1928. He died in the same hospital as Lord Carnarvon, and they suspected arsenic poisoning. In 1929, the curse hit skeptics with two more deaths. It started with Howard Carter's personal secretary, Richard Bethel, who also witnessed the tomb opening. He was found smothered in his bed, and a few months later, his dad jumped off a 7th-floor apartment, sounding totally out of it in his suicide note. "I really cannot stand any more horrors and hardly see what good I'm going to do here, so I am making my exit." Mind you, his house was filled with artifacts for the tomb site gifted to him by his son. To cap it off, Lord Carnarvon's other half-brother died from malarial pneumonia. So, within just 6 years of opening King Tut's tomb, Carnarvon, his half-brothers, Carter's top archaeologist, his secretary, the radiologist from the dig, and a bunch of other bigwigs who visited the tomb were all 6 feet under. What a spooky streak. From the scientific point of view, these deaths could have also been because of the mummies. So it turns out mummies carry some nasty bacteria and mold that can mess with any weak immune system. So what if the media blew the entire curse thing out of proportion, to the extent that people who were already a bit shaky mentally, like Bethel and his old man, genuinely thought they were cursed? So others blame Aleister Crowley, the famous Satanist, for the death. Crowley was actually into ancient Egyptian deities and fetish stuff like that. He might have been upset about Tut's tomb being messed with and dished out some revenge and made it pass off as the ancient curse. You have to admit, it's really strange how all these people tied to Tut's tomb bit the dust within years of each other. Very spooky. But in the end, we might never really know if it was a curse or just a coincidental string of tragic events. Which leads us to the big question. If it wasn't a curse, what was it? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section.